Hello, hello, hello. We'll give people a chance to jump in. How's everybody doing on this beautiful September day? I hope everybody's doing well. Probably gearing up and doing a lot of autumn and maybe even winter sewing projects. So, hope all is going well with everybody in that department as well as all the other departments too. So it's great weather here in Connecticut. This is your monthly weather report from Connecticut. So hello everybody. I see people jumping in from the Adirondacks. Hi Diana. Hi Wanava. Hi Linda. From Tulsa. I just saw the Today Show was going to be out in Tulsa for something. I only saw it very quickly, but I do know they're headed to Tulsa for something. So, hope everybody's doing well. Happy National Sewing Month. But as we all know, every day and every month is National Sewing Month, right? And Serging Month, though really, technically, April is National Serger Month. Hi, everyone. Oh, I see more people jumping in here from Santa Rosa, Texas, Nevada. Patricia, you say you need rain in the Northeast. We had a huge rainstorm where I am in central Connecticut on Saturday. It really came down. Hi from Seattle, Atlanta, Boston, Rhode Island, Michigan. Great to see everybody. Thank you for tuning in. So we're going to cover, I'll give everybody a few more minutes to jump in. We're going to cover a couple of different things today about fine-tuning our stitch on our sergers, because this is always an issue. And I actually had dinner with a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago, and she was working on a very sheer fabric. It was kind of a chiffon. I don't know whether it was a silk or a synthetic, but anyway, it was a very lightweight fabric, and she had this problem. And I thought, well, you know what? I bet if she has had this issue, so have lots of other people. So this would be a great topic for Serger Savvy. Wisconsin, Atlanta, let's see, Naples. Hi, Millie. And I'm going to go over some of the places. I'll be at Arkansas, Kansas. Great. From the UK. Hi, Queen Bee. Okay, so just a few of my housekeeping announcements that I make at every Serger Savvy. I always like to say that I am a very proud Bernina ambassador, but I do not work for Bernina, and I do not receive any commission on sales of machines, software, or any of their accessories or anything else. But if you are in the market for a new machine, and we know the holidays are coming up, but you don't need a holiday to go buy a new machine. But if you're thinking about it, before you put any money down, if you are making a purchase of $1,000 or more, please shoot me an email, gail@gailpatrice.com, and ask for an ambassador coupon. What this is, it's a thank you, and this is only in effect for U.S. customers because it's from Bernina of America. But what it is a $100 rebate check. It's not a gift certificate for more merchandise. It is a $100 check from Bernina of America. And it's a thank you for purchasing their product as well as supporting me on YouTube. And I will be very happy to send that. When you send your email, please include your mailing address so that I'll know where to shoot this off to, and I can get that right off to you. So that's a really great thing. It takes about, I would say, like 6 to 8 weeks for Bernina to process these ambassador coupons. So, but you will receive the check for it. Okay, so, yep, I did hit record, so I'm all set on that. So before I start on our topics, I want to tell you about where I will be. And next week, I will be in Cedar Rapids, Iowa at Inspire to Sew. we're doing a 3-day event out there that should be fantastic, and I'm looking forward to seeing that. I haven't been in Iowa for a long time, so I'm excited to go back. So that is going to be September 17th through 19th. Then after that, I'll be headed out toward Anaheim, California for Mel's for their 3-a-day event. And then after that, to Houston Quilt Festival, always a great event and fun. And in fact, I saw the coolest thing. I don't know where, my husband happened to be watching a program, and I was busy doing something else, and he said, "Ooh, come out here and listen to this." And it was an astronaut who created a quilt square in space. And she talked about the difficulties of being able to do it, because no gravity, and you can't just put things down and expect them to still be in the same place when you finish up. But it's just a cool thing. So that, going to the Houston Quilt Festival, my classes are October 10th and 11th. It's a Friday morning and afternoon and a Saturday morning and afternoon. And then I'll be headed home back to Connecticut. And then my next trip will be for Flash Sewing Quilt for their Sew Creative Expo that is taking place in Bonita Springs, Florida, and that is going to be October 27th, 28th, 29th. I've got my dates written down just so I don't mess up those dates. So Cedar Rapids, Iowa, California, Houston, and then Bonita Springs, Florida. So if any of you are in one of those neighborhoods, or all of them, if you're a real traveler, I'd love to see you. Come up and say hello. Who else do we have in here? Boston, Atlanta, Wisconsin. Oh, from Canada. Hi, Liliana. Millie, I don't know whether you're going to be at the event or not, but if you are, come on over and say hello. San Antonio, Linda from Maryland, thanks for joining in. So, I had a couple of topics that I wanted to talk about. And as I said, when I had dinner with this friend of mine, she brought a sample of a garment that she was making, and she was doing the seams on it. And this, I'm going to switch over to my camera and show you what it looked like when she brought the sample to the restaurant for me to take a look at. This is what she had, and you could see I just recreated it on this piece. Her loops were hanging off the edge of the fabric. And she said, "How do I fix that?" So I said, well, and she happens to have an L890 also for a Serger. But to make this clear for everybody, whether you have a Baby Lock, a Juki, maybe a Janome, whatever brand Serger you have, some of these terms that they named these different adjustment knobs and dials on may be named something different on your brand. But I would say if you have at least a mid-range to top-of-the-line machine, chances are on many brands and models, you will have the ability to make these adjustments. And look in your owner's manual, table of contents, and look for things about fine-tuning a stitch or adjusting it, or also look in the troubleshooting section as well in your table of contents, because that may send you over to the right page on this. So, oh, Millie says, great store proprietors. Okay, great. And that's for Flash, I would assume. Oh, hi, Luann from Finland. Thanks for joining me. I'm a big fan of Mary Mecco. I think they're Finnish. So I love their fabrics. And also, I know my nephew's not watching, but I do want to say happy birthday, Alex. Today is his birthday, and my niece Lily is over in Copenhagen for the semester. She is, from all of her posts I've seen, she's kind of eating her way through all the different bakeries and restaurants over there. So she's having a great time, and I think she's fitting in some studying and work also on that. So hello to her too, just in case she does tune this in. Okay, so let's talk about problem stitches and how to fix them. And then I know I had done a Serger Savvy about seam allowances and understanding how they work. And after I got off the Serger Savvy, I kept thinking, is there one more way I could explain that might make the light bulb go on for people, because it is a difficult concept to wrap your head around, especially if you're newer to serging. But I know people who are, longtime Serger users who still aren't too clear on how to determine seam allowance and how to get accurate seam allowances on their serger. So I did think of one more way to do that, but we'll visit that topic in a little while. So first off, with fine-tuning your stitch, I wanted to talk about using fabrics like denim, and a lot of people like to make jeans, or they like to make bags also out of denim, which is a great workhorse of a fabric. It stands up beautifully over the years. But when they do their seams, they say, ugh, I have ladders in my seams. So let me just show you what that's going to look like. And how do I fix that? Well, there are a couple of different ways to do that. And this has to do with total stitch control. And that is a term that Bernina uses. I like to also call it total stitch creativity, simply because, you know me, I like to do a lot of the creative side of serging. But just on standard seaming, let's call it total stitch control. So this is what a lot of people get when they stitch heavyweight denims, also just really stiff fabrics like upholstery fabrics as well. Things that are heavy and stiff, they get those ladders in the seam and they don't like the look of it. So that when they press it open, even if it matched the fabric, and I did this in a contrast simply to make it easier to see on the camera, but even if I had like a dark navy blue, you would still be able to see those ladders in the seam. We don't want that. It looks loose. So how do you fix it? Well, depending on your machine, if you cannot adjust your tension settings on your machine, what you can do is go to your sewing machine and take your seam allowance and stitch right over it on your sewing machine. Go right over the seam again on your sewing machine with a straight stitch, and that will snug it up. But if you want to be able to do it all in one fell swoop on your serger and not have to go to your sewing machine, there is a way to do that. And let me just tell you a few other times when this would come in handy. I know I was talking with Amanda Murphy, a very famous quilter. We were at an airport. I forget where we were. I think we were probably in Charlotte. And she was doing some quilting and different techniques on her serger, but in the quilting realm. And she said, well, when I put my binding on and I turn it, I can see the ladders in the seam. She said, what am I doing wrong, or how do I fix it? And this is exactly what I told her. The needle that is forming the seam, if in a 4-thread overlock, it would be your left needle. On a 3-thread wide stitch, it would also be your left needle because the right needle wouldn't be in. Or if you're doing a 3-thread narrow stitch on any type of project, it would be the right needle that forms the seam. That is the one that you want to adjust your tension on and tighten it up so that you don't get those ladders in the seam. Hi, Nancy. North Dakota, Michigan. Yay! Glad that you're joining us. Thank you. So you can snug up your tension on that. So let me go to my screen, and I am set up for a 3-thread wide. Now, if I were doing a 4-thread overlock also with my left needle, this would be the exact same adjustment, because it's the needle that's further to the left that is the one that forms a seam when you're doing an overlock stitch. I am set up for a 3-thread wide with my left overlock needle in. I did not put in my right overlock needle. And I also have the upper and lower loopers, and they're all threaded with Serger cone thread, just to make sure that we are all on the same page for that. So this is just like a utility stitch. So let's go and take a look at that on the screen. Okay, so you can see I am set up for a 3-thread wide overlock. Let me just make sure that my focus is crystal clear. I think that's a little bit sharper. Okay, so this is my left needle, and I am on all of the default settings right now. Okay, so, and this is going to change. So my left needle, upper looper, lower looper are all on a 4.0 tension setting, so they're all even with each other. I'm working in the needle up mode. My stitch length is 2.5, and my differential feed is on 1 because denim is a woven stable fabric in the lengthwise and crosswise direction, so I don't have to adjust that really. And that's with if you don't have a denim that has any stretch to it with lycra in it. So that is what I'm doing. Now, when I stitched with all of these settings, going back to the table shot again, this is what I got. Ladders in my seam. So how do I fix that? Let's go and take a look at that. The only thing that I need to adjust is my left needle tension. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tap that and I'm going to crank it up. Now on my machine, I can use the little slider on the screen. I also, to the right of that, have plus and minus buttons that I can use to increase that. But since I have the camera on this, I'm going to crank this up. I'm going to bring it up to about 6. And again, that automatically, when I look at that, is telling me that it is no longer on the default setting. The number has gone from black to yellow, and that yellow frame has appeared around that box, telling me that I'm not on the default setting. I am leaving my looper tensions exactly where they are. They do not factor into this at all. It's just the needle that forms the seam that will make that adjustment. So let's go to the foot. Okay. All right. Now, I have got my stitch width dial, which is right below the bed of the machine, pretty close to the table. The little dial is on 7 millimeters. Let's bring that up. Let's make it about 8 millimeters wide. This is from left to right. I have my stitch finger engaged. It's on the overlock setting. If I pull it back, watch right in here, you'll see the stitch finger disappear. But for something like denim, for this seam, I definitely want that stitch finger engaged. So let's leave that up. My knife is engaged, and we'll talk about adjusting the knife as well as the stitch finger simultaneously, and why that is such a fantastic feature on a machine. Okay, so we're just going to do a short little piece of denim, and I'm just going to do a very quick, I'm just going to trim off a little bit. This is just a sample piece of the fabric, so it's not an actual project. Just to show you, I'm going to hold these threads behind it right now. I'm going to put this back 6.0. I'm going to bring my stitch length up, I think. Let me just show you that too. 2.5. It would be fine on 2.5, but let's bring the stitch length up to 3 and take a look at the screen again. Okay, so you can see my left needle is yellow. Also now my stitch length number at 3.0 is yellow also. It's no longer 2.5, which was the default set, or is the default setting. So let's stitch this. And I wanted to do this right in front of you so that you would know that I didn't do anything else to the stitch. Now, let me go over to the table and let's do a comparison. Here's the one where my tension on my needle was on the default setting. Here are my ladders. And here it is, and I am holding onto the edges. Now, if I really tug super hard, yes, I can just see a tiny bit of the ladders in there, which would be pretty typical. But once I press that, you see those ladders have disappeared. That is exactly what I want to happen. And that is how you fix that. So it's just a matter of tightening up the tension on the needle that forms the seam. For a 3-thread wide, which this is, let's take a look at that also. Here's my needle thread right here. It looks like a straight stitch. My upper looper and my lower looper, okay? But those do not factor into this, solving this problem. It's strictly the needle tension that is forming the seam. So that has been fixed. Now, if you were working on something also, say like for my tablet case, I use a foam interfacing because I want a little bit of cushioning to put my iPad in that, especially when I travel, so that it doesn't get scratched, or if, heaven forbid, it got dropped, if it's in there, it has a better chance of surviving with that foam interfacing. But what does that do? That creates a tremendous amount of thickness because you're working with the outer fabric that shows on the project. You've got the foam interfacing, and then you've got a lining in there as well. And the outer and lining fabrics are usually a quilting weight cotton, but I have also used felted sweaters with the foam too. But what does it do? It creates a very thick sandwich, and that was what Amanda Murphy was talking about when she was putting binding on her quilt, because she was putting the stitch through a double layer of her binding, the top of her quilt sandwich, batting, and then the backing as well. So she had multiple layers too. And so when she said she had those ladders, I knew exactly what she was talking about. So all of these things are apropos for being fixed by tightening up your needle tension. And this is something that I highly recommend testing on a scrap sample of your fabric, or again, if you're doing those multiple layers, just put a little mini sandwich together with the interfacing or batting and the layers that you're going to be stitching through, the number of layers. Stitch with that increased tension on your needle. If you're still seeing ladders, I mean, if I really yanked on this super hard, you can still see actually it's pretty darn good, but teeny tiny. But if I pulled really hard, you could still see a little bit of that laddering in there. If I were making something that was a super tight fit, or even using denim for, say, covering doing a slip cover or something like that, where you wanted a really snug fit on it, maybe that 6.0 tension setting wouldn't be quite high enough. What I could do is test it and just go up number by number once it got to be pretty close, and just see at what point do I no longer see any ladders. And that's exactly what I would do also on anything with multiple layers or a foam interfacing, like as I said, my tablet case. If you're making a tote bag with something like that and you've got a lot of layers in there for interfacing, I'm trying to think, like Peltex, that's another thing that's stiff. It's not quite as cushiony as a foam interfacing, but there is some thickness and bulk to it. All of those would be examples of how to fix it. Tighten up my needle tension. Leave your looper tensions on the default setting though. Those do not make a difference on that. Are there any questions about that at all? I can stop for just a second and take a look in the chat if you have a question about that. You want to be able to adjust those. Now, again, if you're working on a machine that auto sets your tension, can you do that? No. That's when you would take that first one where you can see the ladders without pulling it apart. I'm not putting any tension whatsoever on this. That would be one where you would go over to your sewing machine and just line up your needle with the needle thread on your serged edge and stitch over it just to tighten up that seam. But any machine that has tension adjustments, you're going to increase the needle tension. And if you're doing a 4-thread overlock with your left and your right needle in, do you have to adjust the right needle? No, that is not going to form the seam. Just the left needle is. So you can leave that right needle on the default setting. It'll be perfectly fine. It's just there for extra reinforcement on that 4-thread overlock seam. So just your left needle, or again, as you saw what I was doing with the 3-thread wide, your left needle. If I'm just doing a 3-thread narrow stitch with my right needle, I would just adjust my right needle tension. So very simple to do that. So I don't see any questions about that. So I think that kind of covers it. Now, also, let's go back to that sheer fabric. This is just, let me just put this right up here. Okay. This is just a polyester. It's kind of pretty though. I've had it in my stash for quite a while and I've got an idea for what I want to make out of this. But it was so apropos when this woman asked me about having this problem, and I said, oh, that's a super easy fix. So what I have on my machine is what's called a micro thread control dial. And what that does is it just kind of micro adjusts where my stitch finger is. And I will say that it works best in stitch widths from 6 to 8 millimeters wide. But when I have done reverse flat locking where I see the ladders, and if I want to weave 1/8 inch ribbons through that, like side by side through the same flat lock stitching, I move that MTC dial up to a +2 because it moves the stitch finger just a tiny bit farther right. So I want to go over to the machine so that you can really see what I'm talking about. Okay, I'm going to open up the front of my machine, taking off my trim bin. And I am going to put my knife down, and I'm also going to turn the light on. It glares when I'm stitching, but I want you to see the inside of the machine better. So let me turn that light on. And I am going to brighten up my exposure too, just so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so I'm going to put my knife down. I'm going to disengage that So I put that down, and I'm going to move my presser foot out of the way so that you can see. Here is my stitch finger, right here. And you can see the stitch is forming between the needle and the loopers, and it goes over the stitch finger. And in overlock mode, that is one of the factors that controls your stitch width from left to right, not stitch length, but your stitch width. So if you can see I'm bringing my stitch width and cutting width dial down. I'm going to bring it all the way down to 5, and you can see that stitch finger moving in, and you can also see the knife moving at the same time. It's moving simultaneously with that stitch finger. And when I want a super wide stitch, the one that you saw on the denim was 8 millimeters wide. I can go all the way up to 9 for a stitch width on this, which I really like if I've got a seam with a bulky fabric, because I find that that little bit wider seam allowance tends to make the fabric lay flatter, and it presses flatter too. It doesn't tend to pop up. So let's watch my stitch finger, and I think I'm going to put up my knife again now that you know where you're looking for the stitch finger, right here. And let me pull the thread off of that so that you can see it very clearly. We're all the way down to 5, which means that the stitch finger is very close to the needle for a narrow stitch. But when I want to widen that out, I'm going to turn my cutting width and stitch width dial up to a higher number. Here we are at 6 millimeters, and I think let me put that knife up too, which is right here, and you're going to see both of them move to the right. I'm up to 6.5, 7, 7.5, 8, all the way up to 9. So that's going to give me the widest stitch that the machine can do if I moved my needle over to the left overlock position right now. Oh, excuse me, it is in the left overlock position. So that'll give me a super wide stitch, and which is really, really attractive and nice. So let's take a look at that. That's one way to adjust your stitch. If I were doing a seam on a chiffon like I showed you, would I want that wide a stitch? I don't think so, because I think it would show through the fabric. I also wouldn't be using this on a super close fitting garment either, because it's delicate, and I don't think it would stand up to the stress and strain of sitting, bending, moving your arms around. I think something like a kimono or that type of thing, it would work well. Just something light and kind of looser fitting. Around an armhole, you could always reinforce it with a little bit of stay tape too. That would give it some strength. So, but let's take a look. Let's go back here. Okay. And here we are at 9 millimeters. Stitch finger and knife are pretty far out to the right. Now you're going to watch them both go in as I'm narrowing down the stitch, skinnying it down. Now, why was it important for me to show you that the knife is moving simultaneously with the stitch finger? Because I know on my very first serger, I had to adjust my stitch finger and knife individually. And it was a little bit of a guessing game of getting the knife to cut off the correct amount of fabric for the width of the stitch that I was doing. Sometimes if that knife was too close to the needles and it was cutting off too much fabric, I would get thread hanging off or stitches hanging off the edge of the seam. The loopers had too much space. But then if I'm not cutting off enough, that's when the fabric starts to look wrinkled and kind of crunched up underneath the seam. So I had to adjust each one individually, do a lot of testing, and make sure that they were both in the correct place. But if you have a machine that will adjust the stitch finger at the same time, simultaneously, as your knife, your cutting width is always going to be correct for the stitch that you're doing. So that is a fantastic feature on a machine. So, and plus it just makes it so much easier. You're not spending time fussing around with how much fabric should I be cutting off, and seeing either the fabric crunched up or loops hanging off the edge. So that does that. Now stitch width also can come into play if you're doing something not only on sheer fabrics, and I'm going to show you how to adjust this to eliminate those loops from hanging off. But also, if you're working on something puffy and lofty, say like polar fleece, you may have to go in the opposite direction. So let's go over to the machine. I think I'm going to switch over to a, let me leave it on 3-thread wide first and do the polar fleece first. But what am I going to do with that MTC dial? And I'm going to show you where you find that. And again, depending on the machine that you own, it may not have a little MTC. I can't turn my machine. Well, I guess I could. Let me just turn this a little bit and see if you can see the MTC on the face of it. Not really. But it says MTC on the face of this dial. So, and what that stands for is micro thread control. And now I have gotten my camera off. So let me go back to me so that you're not dizzy. Or let me go back to the screen so that I can just straighten this out a little bit. And I'm going to shut the light off because it's going to glare. Okay, so let me just make sure that I got this in the right position. Let me pull this back out a little bit more. All right, so I want you to see what I'm doing now with this. If I needed to adjust my micro thread control with the stitch finger, I go to that little MTC dial. And let me just mention that I know on your baby lock sergers, at least probably from the midline up, hi Deidre, from the midline up on the inside wall of your serger, and I'm going to turn my machine just a little bit, right like this. Now this locks down my upper looper on my machine, so this doesn't count for this. But on your baby lock, when you open those front doors, there's a dial on the inside wall, and there's a minus sign on the left, there's a plus sign on the right, and that allows you to fine tune where that stitch finger is. So on that one, and I do think that probably that feature might be available on some other brands and models of machine. Probably not on entry-level machines. You'd probably be looking again from mid to top of the line, that type. So here is my MTC dial on this. The default setting on this is 0, okay? But if I wanted to increase that, what I want you to do, and I'm going to move my needle out of the way, and this only controls my stitch finger. It does not affect the knife. But if I wanted to change that, to bring it out and give a little more thread per stitch in the loopers, I could turn this to a +2 all the way up, which would be very handy when I'm stitching polar fleece, sweatshirt fleece, probably velour, anything that's really thick, lofty, and needs a little bit more thread for the upper and lower loopers to meet precisely on the edge of the fabric in overlock mode. So let's take a look at how that works. I'm going to put my knife back up. I'm bringing my presser foot back in. Let me just go to me for a second. So I stitched once on this, but let me stitch, and I did a very narrow 3 thread, and you can kind of see, let me just show you that too. This is a 3 thread narrow that I stitched before I went online, and you can see here's the top, the upper looper thread, here's the lower looper, and you can almost tell that the lower looper thread was kind of straining to meet that upper looper thread on the edge of the fabric, but because I did not adjust that micro thread control, that MTC dial. But let's see what happens when I do. I'm putting everything back together again here. I'm going to bring my stitch width dial. I'm going to bring that stitch width up to 8, and I am putting my MTC dial. Let me show you that. I have that all the way up to +2. So I'm just going to cut this in half so that I can open it up and we can do a side-by-side comparison. I should have done a second piece of this. Brenda, did you see what dial I moved? You asked if I could show it. It's that MTC dial. And that is available on those Bernina Sergers. Also, I want to emphasize, because I like this to be something that is apropos for all brands and models. Look in your table of contents. You may have the same thing, but it may be named something different. So check that out. All right, so now I've got a really skinny piece here. And I've got my MTC dial. I am going to also increase my stitch length because we are going through a lot of thickness. And I'll show that to you. It's easily, without compressing it under the presser foot, I'd say 3/8 to a 1/2 inch thick, because it's a 200 weight polar fleece. So I'm going to bring my stitch length up to 4, which sounds pretty long, but again, it's going to compensate for the thickness of that fabric. 4, I'm going to leave my differential feet on 1. I'm going to leave my left needle tension up high because I am going through these layers. So let's go to the foot and take a look at that. Okay, so I've tilted my fabric around. I'm just going to trim off a little bit at a time. And I'm going to leave my presser foot pressure right now. I'm going to leave that on the default and just see what happens. Let me shut this light, off, just so it's not glaring. I think that's good. And I'm going to hold my thread tails to help this get going under the foot. Oops. Oh, I guess it helps to put the presser foot down. Okay. Okay. Now let's take a look at this compared to the other original stitch that I did before I came online with you. Okay, so here is my new stitch. And you can see that the upper and lower loopers are meeting right between the two layers on the edge of the fabric, which is exactly what we want. Let's open it up. Because I've got that needle tension on 6, no ladders are showing in here. Let's compare that to this one. That's a narrower stitch where you can see that that lower looper is really straining to meet the upper looper. And I had the tension up a little bit higher when I was working on this too as a sample, so you're not seeing any ladders in that. But you can see the difference with this. And basically, what it is kind of the equivalent of is just, it's almost like letting out a seam on an outfit. I know we never have to do that, but if something has gotten a little bit snug and you want to let it out a little bit, it's the same idea with this. You're just easing the stitch width out to fit around the layers of the fabrics because they are so thick. And conversely, if you are doing something that's on a very sheer fabric where your loops are hanging off, we can fix that too. So let's see how we eliminate this. And this would be a case, going back to when I was talking about my original serger, where I had to adjust the stitch finger individually from the knife. This would be a case of where the knife might have been cutting off too much fabric and allowing the loops to fall off the edge. So let's go to the machine again. You can see I'm going to have to use my handy dandy vacuum to clean that up. Let me grab a different, oh no, I guess this is okay. This is 2 layers. I am going to change out my stitch first. I am going to go from a 3-thread wide. I'm going to go down to a 3-thread narrow. So I'm going to change my needle from the left position to the right needle position. I'm going to cut that thread. Raise my presser foot. Pull that out. I'm going to move my needle over to the right needle threading route, which is the green threading route on my machine. Rethread. Move my needle. And let me just show you what I'm doing too. Let me go to that foot. Okay. So I'm taking my needle from the left overlock position and I'm just moving it over 1 slot into the right needle position. That automatically skinnies down my stitch by about 2 millimeters because it's closer to the loopers. I'm going to rethread the needle. Cut a nice fresh end here. Speaking of polar fleece, I was actually wearing a polar fleece top last night while I was doing a couple of things. It got pretty chilly here, so I had a polar fleece top on while I was doing a little bit of work last night after dinner. Okay, so we've got a narrower stitch. Now, because this is a sheer fabric, let's see what I'm going to do with that MTC dial. I'm going to move my machine. I find that it's easier to move the machine than the camera. Okay, so I was on +2 for that thick, lofty polar fleece. Now, I want to bring that down. 0 is my default, and that's why it's shadowed and in gray. I'm going to bring that down to a minus number. What does that do? It reduces the amount of thread in the loopers for forming the stitch, so that those stitches are, the loops meet precisely on the edge of the fabric. I'm going to start it at -1. Now, I'm not 100% sure that that's going to be the right setting. So this is where testing comes in. So I'm going to, let's go back to the screen again. I need to switch my machine to a 3-thread narrow, which is stitch number 4. You can certainly scroll through the menu on this to get to the right one and get that. I am going to leave my tensions on the normal setting. I don't need to snug up that right needle for the seam, because we are going through 2 layers of a chiffon. It's very lightweight. However, I'm going to lower that stitch length. I'm going to shorten that up. I'm going to bring it to maybe, let's bring it down to 2.0 and see how that does. Now, again, this is why I always like to test everything. I'm not 100% sure I'm on the right setting for this chiffon. I'm just making an educated guess that -1 on the micro thread control dial is going to work correctly for this. But the proof is in the testing. So let's try it out. I'm going to go back to the presser foot. Okay. I have got my stitch width on 8 right now. I think I'm going to bring that down to about 6. Now this stitch width, because I'm on the right needle, it's not going to be quite 6 millimeters. It's going to be a little narrower than that, probably about maybe 4 to 4.5 millimeters wide. So let's take a look and see what that looks like. I'm just going to cut off my previous line of stitching. Actually, I think I'll save a little bit of that so we can compare. I'll go over here. And again, this is just a test because I'm not sure I'm on the right micro thread control dial number. Okay, now let's take a look at this. And I think it still needs to be adjusted down. Let's take a look at that. It's better, but it's not perfect. So I'm going to bring that MTC dial down to -2, okay? All the way down. And that's going to snug up that stitch a little bit more in the seam. So let's see how that works. And I'm going to just bring out my stitch width dial to about 6.5 and see if that helps. These are all the things that you want to do just to test and get what you want for a finished product. So I'm going to cut that off. I'm going to leave a little bit more just so we can take a look at this again. I think everybody can see that. And I can tell as this is stitching. I think I've hit it on the nose. Chain off, and let's go over and do a comparison. Okay, I think I have kind of a thick, I think I have a 90-14 needle in, which I would probably use an 80-12 or even a 70 on this because it's so lightweight. Here's the first one. You can see those, or the second one actually, where the loops look better than they did before, but they're still not perfect. Here we are with the -2, and there are your loops right on the edge of the fabric. So that was the improvement on that. Are there any questions about that at all? I'll be very happy to answer them. And then we're going to, I think I've still got 5 minutes left. So I want to just do one more swing at seam allowance too. But are there any questions about adjusting your stitch width or tensions on your needles for a really good stitch? Oh, Jack and Doreen said, what dates am I going to be there? In Anaheim, California, I will be there September 29th through October 1st. That's for Mel's Sewing in Anaheim, California. So you can go to their website. And actually, I did a YouTube... I did a little promo video for it also, but you can go to their website and probably register. I'm not 100% sure if it's completely sold out or not, but if there are spaces, I would love to see you. Okay, so I don't see any more questions about adjusting either with total stitch control, with your tensions. Oh, Maureen says, does the weight of the thread make a difference when adjusting the width? Generally, I would say probably not. But again, before I start anything with decorative threads, Maureen, I always do a test run on scrap fabric because that's an excellent question. Every single thing, the type of needle that you're using, the weight of the thread, what stitch settings you're on, all of those things do factor into getting a perfect result on your project and the look that you're looking for on a particular stitch. So I would, in general, say it probably would not make a difference as far as loops hanging off or crunching up the fabric under the stitch. But I would say definitely test it to see, because if you're going on with something like a lightweight machine embroidery thread versus a 12 weight, I would not use decorative threads for seams that weren't going to show, number one, because I wouldn't waste my more expensive thread on areas that are hidden. Like when I did this top, I just used Serger cone thread. But if you're doing something like a rolled hem, or I have an upcoming Serger tip clip on a new stitch that I haven't shown. It's not a new stitch to the machine, but I have never shown it, so keep an eye out for it. But that would be an example of a time when I might use a 12 weight thread versus a Serger cone thread. But definitely testing will give you the right answer on that. So isn't that an annoying answer? It's kind of a non-answer answer. So it could make a difference. So let me just put it like that. And that's why testing will give you the right answer for that. Also, even though the loops may meet exactly on the edge of the fabric, maybe you want a slightly different look on that edge with a thicker or lighter thread. So that would be another reason to do testing. Okay. As I said, it's like a non-answer answer. So, and I know it is annoying. I know I get this all the time, even with gathering, where people go, what is the ratio? Well, when you're using a gathering foot, an average ratio, like on a quilting weight cotton, quilting weight cotton would be like a 2-to-1 ratio of gathers to your flat fabric. But that doesn't always hold true, because the weight of the fabric, any stiffer finishes on it, and that type of thing can make a world of difference. Test is the coin of the realm for getting the right look. Okay, so I still think, it is just 1 o'clock, but I'll run a few minutes over. That's okay. Okay, so I thought about trying to help people understand seam allowance a little bit better on their sergers. So I am going to go back and just show you. I just did a little sample neckline because I think this will really nail it for 99% of the people. All right, so this is just my little pretend neckline where I stitched about, and obviously I did it in a hurry, it's not 100% accurate. Say my pattern called for a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, I have stitched that 5/8 inch seam allowance, but typically when we do anything like around a neckline or something that's sleeveless or even with sleeves, oftentimes we need to grade the seam allowance. Well, what you're doing with that is you've got your little neckline, you've got it stitched, okay? And we're gonna pretend that we've got understitching and all that stuff done, or you can do it afterwards. But what I'm going to do is I am going to grade and cut down that seam allowance. And let me just show you what I'm doing over at the table. Okay, I have stitched it at the designated 5/8. We won't tell anybody it's not 100% perfect. Now I am grading and trimming off a lot of that seam allowance so that it is, we've reduced the bulk when we go to turn the facing to the inside of the garment. This is the exact same thing that your knife is doing on your serger. Even though that seam allowance, that 5/8 seam allowance, no longer is that on the project, you did stitch it at 5/8 of an inch from the raw edge at the designated amount. But if you're doing it on your sewing machine, you're trimming off that excess seam allowance by hand. Your serger is doing that at the same time that you are stitching. That is the only difference. So then when you go to press it, fold it in and press it, and you've understitched and all that other good stuff, you've graded that seam. That's what your serger is doing as you're stitching. So instead of it being a two-step process like your sewing machine, you stitched your seam allowance, then you've taken your scissors, graded that seam allowance. You, even though there's not 5/8 of an inch left anymore, you still stitched it at the correct distance from the raw edge. You've done the designated seam allowance and then trimmed it off. Just because that fabric is gone doesn't mean you no longer have that, you no longer stitched at the 5/8 inch seam allowance or 1/2 inch or whatever your pattern is telling you for the correct seam allowance. So I thought about that afterwards, and I thought, well, basically my serger is grading the seam as I stitch instead of having to do it by hand afterwards the way I would on a sewing machine. So I hope that helps everybody for fine-tuning your stitch. And if you have a different brand or model machine and you want a little bit of help with that fine-tuning, shoot me an email and tell me what brand, what model machine you have, and I hope I can help you with that. But again, if you're looking your table of contents on your operator manual, that probably will list all of the different components and what they do on your machine. And if you don't find it in the headings of the regular things, go to the troubleshooting section, and that might send you to the correct page for the correct information. So I hope everybody is having a lovely National Sewing Month. And thanks for joining me today. Again, if you're in the market for a new machine, before you put any money down, shoot me an email. I'll send you an ambassador coupon, and that's US only. And I hope you all enjoy September. Our weather here is feeling very nice. Thanks, Nancy. And Celeste, too. Oh, thank you. Thanks for joining me today. And I will see you again in Serger Savvy in October. And maybe before then, if you're coming to any of my events. Thanks very much. Happy sewing and serging.